Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America, website thisweekinamerica.us. As mentioned, our guest on the program, basketball journalist Roland Lazenby. He spent almost 30 years covering Michael Jordan's time in college and the NBA. His intimate access to Jordan's coaches, friends, teammates, and family members provided him with a truly well-rounded perspective of the man, the myth, and the legend. His book is called Michael Jordan, The Life. And in the book, he pulls back the curtain on many lesser-known aspects of Michael Jordan's life. Roland Lazenby, welcome to the program. Great to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
This book is excellent. You've got about 700 pages. Most of those pages you'll want to go back and read a couple of times. It's just filled with all sorts of great information. And it's interesting in the beginning to establish that what reached out initially to Michael Jordan, he wanted creative control, and you really weren't going to give it to him. Thus, we really have a different look at Michael.
Right. You know, Michael has had a number of books that he's done with collaborators, and we really wanted to do an independent book with the benefit of time. You know, it's been 15, 16 years since Michael played for the Chicago Bulls, and we wanted to have a book that assessed him from a little further down the road.
And you're right, the book really needed, his story really needed an independent telling, and that's what we have in the book, Michael Jordan, The Life. Roland Lazenby, our guest on This Week in America. The book is available wherever books are sold all across the country, of course, online at Amazon, information at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Everybody has always asked the question, how did Michael get to be Michael? What in his past made him this fierce competitor, this guy that could turn it on and off and get in and out of the zone? You really go back and literally research thousands of family members' death certificates, trying to piece the family together. Let's go back to 1891 and his great-grandfather, Dawson Jordan, and born in 1891, but he had a great impact on Michael's life.
Right, he died when Michael Jordan was 14, and Dawson Jordan was quite a figure. He lorded over the entire Jordan family his entire life. He was 5'5" and crippled from birth, but a fierce man, a moonshiner, a very tough guy on the coastal plain in North Carolina. And he was also a sharecropper, a logger. He was a chef for hunt clubs in the region in his later years, and Michael Jordan worshipped him. But most important, Dawson Jordan had the original tongue for which Michael Jordan is so well known.
So that dates all the way back to someone born in 1891, and it's interesting because at that time, as you're reading the book, you sort of forget about this. People didn't live to be real old at that time, especially someone who grew up in poverty, the circumstances that Dawson grew up. He lived to be, 86 years old, outlived his wife by decades, and basically was a single father back then.
Right, and again, his strength in being a single father of an only child. And he himself was an only child. So it was a very narrow path to Michael Jordan's lineage. But again, you could see where Jordan drew from that hard edge of the moonshiners on the coastal plain in North Carolina. Quite often, Michael Jordan was very capable of displaying that toughness himself.
Edward Peoples is another name in his past, and I believe this was on his mother's side, a grandfather. And here's someone that, in fact, a lot of people say Michael is probably more like Edward than anybody else. Explain who Edward was and the impact he had on Michael's life.
Well, you know, in many ways, this is a Black Power story, and a lot of that Black Power begins with Edward Peoples. He, too, was a moonshiner, and he was a sharecropper. And I accessed a report from the Board of Agriculture of North Carolina in 1922 that explained that all of the state sharecroppers, tens of thousands of landless farmers, were broke, that no one had made it in sharecropping, that the land was being ruined, and a generation of white and black North Carolinians were destitute. Yet Michael Jordan's grandfather on his mother's side made it as a sharecropper. He came to own his own land. As I said, he was a moonshiner. He also worked in a local lumber company. And he was just a very tough, very fierce sort of guy. And, I grew up in the South, and I was looking for, I knew well some of the elements of Jim Crow, and I was looking for who was Michael Jordan before Michael Jordan. And I thought Edward Peoples could well be that guy, that kind of guy who was going to win no matter what the odds.
Let's talk about Michael's dad, James Jordan. A lot written about him, still sort of an enigma as you try to read and piece him together in Michael's life. Here was a dad who was really disapproving of Michael and, like Michael's older brother Larry, better.
Right. Of course, James Jordan was impressive in his own right in many ways. He came out of the 50s when race in the South was still very much a factor. North Carolina had more Klan members than all the other southern states combined. But James Jordan had a mechanical bent. He could fix a tractor by age 10. He was always fixing engines, and so was his middle son, Larry, who was 11 months older than Michael. But Michael was not mechanically inclined, and that made him the target of James Jordan's ridicule from a young age, and it was apparently substantial according to family members. He also challenged Michael's masculinity. And then later, when Michael got into high school, all of the Jordans had been industrious people, held jobs, and Michael Jordan was quite lazy. He refused to work. His mother finally helped him get a job, and he kept it 1 week. I found it interesting that his pay stub from that 1 week of working in his entire life made it into the Cape Fear Museum in North Carolina. But his father was just vexed no end. Now, obviously, at some point, James Jordan came to have tremendous affection for Michael, but that's not what hardwired Michael as a competitor. It was an answer to this fatherly disapproval from an early age.
You're listening to This Week in America. Roland Lazenby, our guest on the program, author of the excellent new book, Michael Jordan, The Life, available all across the country. Information at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Let's take it up to this time when Michael is really beginning to find himself as a basketball player. The, of course, legendary story as a sophomore, he's cut from the high school basketball team. He goes to a summer camp as he's heading into what is junior year. And it's interesting as you read all the names that keep coming back in there. You've got a camp that's run by Bobby Cremins, who went on to be a successful college basketball coach at Appalachian State at the time. Talk about that summer camp and what they couldn't believe this was the same kid that got cut the year before from the basketball team.
Right. That was a refrain over and over again. Of course, Michael Jordan had been the best ninth grade player in the program, but he was only 5'7", 5'8". He had not gotten the kind of growth that would make him so special. He was still very good. He scored 40 points in a ninth grade game with 6-minute quarters. But there were 8 senior guards on the varsity. And so his coach had kept him on the JV to make sure he got plenty of playing time. That meant Michael wasn't listed in the top 500 high school players in America as a junior. But he went to that camp before he ever played a varsity game, and Bobby Cremins saw him there and called a friend who was a basketball scout, and they were stunned as anyone was. And the following year when Michael appeared at the 5-star camp at Howard Garfinkel, the basketball guru's famous camp, he likewise stunned people with this tremendous display of athleticism and desire. And everyone was asking at every appearance, where did this guy come from?
You know, it's interesting you talk about in the book, and Bob Gibbons, the basketball, he had one of the original poop sheets. It wasn't read by a whole lot of people. Certainly it wasn't a blogger like we have now.
At that time, he was not. You're correct.
He probably would have been one of the top names, and everybody would have known it today. But you mentioned in the book that he goes up and he's introduced to Michael, who's a junior, and the first thing he says is, "Mr. Gibbons, what do I have to do to get better?" I mean, at that point, what that spark was still that was there. It was ready to go.
Right. He, when he arrived finally at the University of North Carolina as a freshman, Dean Smith, the coach for the Tar Heels, was absolutely stunned at Jordan's ability to listen, to attend to what a coach had to say. And Dean Smith had some impressive guys through his program, but he'd never seen a freshman so capable of learning. And that listening is sort of one of these skills that Michael Jordan had that it's really never gotten much in the way of mention, but it's critical to his success, and it remains a factor today in his success as an owner of the NBA franchise in Charlotte.
You know, it's interesting, the five-star camp you mentioned, and you say that Michael has said, this really turned my life around. This was a moment of transformation. A key figure in that as well is Roy Williams, who wasn't a coach at the time, he was a graduate assistant at North Carolina.
Right. It was very unusual that they took the effort to get Michael Jordan into the five-star camp, because when you have a great recruit, you want to keep him hidden. But Jordan was so good, literally, people could not believe their eyes. They thought, we've got to be missing something here. So apparently the Carolina coaches wanted to see him in the five-star camp against elite talent to make sure they weren't making some mistake. And, of course, he played just a few minutes in the five-star camp. And Howard Garfinkel, determined that he was a one-look player. All you had to do was see him for a little bit, and you knew he was going to be great.
Seen enough, we know the guy is going to be special. And it's interesting, you point out in the book, Michael Jordan, The Life, Roland Lazenby, our guest on the program. Garfinkel, years later, is trying to meet up with Michael at the end of an NBA game, and he's got something back from the day at the five-star camp. He's going to try to get it autographed, and he's sort of shoved aside by the guards because Jordan's leaving, but Jordan's peripheral vision, he recognizes and wants to go back and said, he's the guy who made me what I am.
Right. And Howard Garfinkel, who's a wonderful storyteller in his own right, just delighted in telling that. He said, of course, it wasn't true. Michael made himself. But he had great fun with that moment.
You know, at the time, Michael is looking around for colleges, and you talk in the book about there was some concern about Dean Smith, and this guy was very controlling, and is he really the right coach? It's all in the book, Michael Jordan, The Life. You talk about some other players that he might have ended up with in college, and Dr. J. Julius Erving or Patrick Ewing rather, was considering going to North Carolina or North Carolina State. The two of them could have played together.
Right. Patrick Ewing visited North Carolina at the same time Michael Jordan did, and he was quite taken with Dean Smith and taken with Chapel Hill. But then when he went to his hotel, there was a Klan demonstration across the street. And Ewing, who was living in the Boston area, said, there's no way I could come to the South. And, one of the misconceptions in understanding the cultural background that Michael Jordan came from is that the Klan was such a presence in North Carolina, even up into the 1980s.
Yeah, when you think back, and it's all coming back as you're reading the book, it doesn't seem that long ago. 1980 seems like, modern history, but we were still going through turbulent times back then, especially in that part of the country. Michael Jordan, The Life, Roland Lazenby, our guest on the program, and as Michael's going through this, he's sort of fascinated with maybe playing with Ralph Sampson at Virginia. In fact, he writes a letter to Terry Holland, and Terry Holland possibly could have had Michael Jordan playing for him at Virginia.
Right. Terry Holland admitted in the interviews for this book that they chose not to recruit Michael Jordan. They were trying to sign Chris Mullin, who, of course, is a Hall of Fame player in his own right and went on to St. John's. But, of course, Jordan then went on to punish Virginia in a variety of ways in Atlantic Coast Conference play over the next 3 years. One of the most astounding plays in all my years of covering basketball was during Jordan's sophomore year at North Carolina in 1983 when he blocked Ralph Sampson's shot in Charlottesville. He came from the lower block and all the way across the lane to the elbow, and it was such a resounding block. It left everybody jumping on press row. Terry Holland said it was one of the only times in his career when he caught himself applauding for a member of the other team.
Well, I'm sure that's a natural reaction for someone who's around athletes and appreciates a play like that. I would assume from press row, you were, no cheering from press row, but you're probably pretty impressed with that and ready to stand up and applaud as well.
15 years later, I was sitting around with Michael before a game one night in Charlotte and asked him about that block. And he said, that surprised even me. and that's been the thing about my career, he said. You know, there were surprises at every turn. He said, I had no idea I could do all these things athletically. But in the moment, in the moment of competition, in the heat of all that, you know, he had this ability to find those upper reaches of human flight, of behavior, of athletic feats.
And there are so many stories like that in the book, Michael Jordan, The Life. A few minutes left with Roland, and I want to talk about fascinating, and so many fascinating stories, but one I'd sort of forgotten. I sort of assumed that Michael Jordan was born into the Nike family, probably adopted by Phil Knight at an early age, and the two were synonymous for many years. And you go back and you talk about that story. Nike at the time was what, just sort of a fledgling company. Michael's a young kid. Really, all he wants out of the deal is a car, and he prefers Adidas because they had nicer sweatsuits.
Right, and it was actually Michael's mother who was...
Interesting story there, because she really, was the one that was the businesswoman. She controlled this negotiation.
She was the daughter of Edward Peoples. She had a falling out with her father, but she had every bit of his determination. Sonny Vaccaro, who was so responsible for building the Nike brand, said that Dolores Jordan was one of the single most impressive people he'd met over the course of his life. And she was the one who drove and pushed that contract with Nike. And, of course, that contract today serves Michael Jordan very well. It was a fabulous contract, unlike any that any basketball player or athlete had ever received. A package of about $2.5 million, many times over what basketball players were getting at the time, plus a 25% royalty on all shoes sold. And so it is the gift that keeps on giving for Michael Jordan.
Yeah, and you point out in the book he probably could have got a larger percentage, but at that time nobody knew if these were even going to sell, so they took a little more money up front rather than a higher percentage.
They could have had a 50% royalty on those shoes, but no one knew. Nike's stock was $2 a share. The thing that drove so much of it was Jordan's shoe was red and black, of course, the Air Jordan, and the NBA, by its rules, allowed only white shoes. So it banned Jordan's shoe and fined him $5,000 a night for wearing it. And Nike said, "Oh, this is great. Let's just pay the fines and we'll sell." And they sold, $150 million worth of, quote, banned shoes right away.
Well, and looking back, you'd think, yeah, I'd sign Michael Jordan in a minute. The kid's 21. I mean, he's immature in some ways. And he's going into the NBA, which is not the NBA of today. What they're coming off, all the cocaine stories and all the scandals from the 1970s. This really was not a Premier League at the time, was it?
No, and in fact, the Chicago Bulls were one of the worst teams in that very seedy league. It had already started to get better. David Stern had become the commissioner in 1984. Larry Bird with the Celtics and Magic Johnson with the Lakers just met in the championship series. And so things were starting to turn around. But the Chicago Bulls weren't even scheduled to be on TV a single time Michael Jordan's rookie year. That gives you an idea of how little focus there was on him in the draft.
It's interesting. One final thought as you're talking about his mother, Dolores, and the negotiations. She was really trying to get a deal, and she got it where they were partners as opposed to somebody working for a wage or being an employee. She really was shrewd in putting this deal together.
That's why I describe this as a black power story. It's not the black power of protest and politics, but it is that it is a story of economic determination right off the coastal plain of North Carolina. Came right out of the sharecropping experience, and and it came from a people who were denied access to any sort of political power or political involvement. And it is an extraordinary family story. There's no question. The determination of Dolores Jordan Dolores Peoples as her maiden name, and the determination of her father factored into this greatly.
Got about a minute left. Yet one of the great criticisms of Jordan has always been, and I'll ask if it's right or wrong, his unwillingness to take political stands, to maybe use the celebrity that he had to further the cause. Is that a fair criticism?
I think it was early in his career, but I think that was more the inclination of his family that had never been involved in politics. African Americans in North Carolina really weren't allowed much to be involved in politics. They'd been violently excluded from it. But as he matured and he began giving to political causes, and of course has done more of that. It's still not his primary thing. He's famous for saying, when he was asked to get involved in the Harvey Gantt Senate race in 1990 against Jesse Helms, he said, Republicans buy shoes too. Or he was quoted as saying that.
Right.
And of course, that's that business mindset, and it led to a lot of criticism. But again, that was the focus of the Jordan family.
The book is excellent. Michael Jordan, The Life. Our guest on the program has been Roland Lazenby. Unfortunately, out of time. Pick up the book, read it. You'll really enjoy this. It's an excellent read. Roland, thank you so much for taking time to talking with us. Congratulations on an excellent book. Well done.
Thank you so much for all the time and for your kind thoughts.
Thank you for being with us on the program. And more information, of course, available at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. The book, Michael Jordan, The Life, Roland Lazenby. It's available Amazon and every major bookstore all across the country. Right back after these messages.